So at the end of the last YouTube, Sheila was digging out the mimeograph machine. And what's a mimeograph machine? Do you remember? Yes, a mimeograph machine is a type of copier that is not working automatically. It needs lots of ink, and it's something that had to be used before the photocopy machines were invented. Well, after Sheila dug it out of the closet, she found out pretty fast that it's not so easy to write your best on a stencil. I kept goofing, and none of my lines came out straight. They all ran downhill. I threw away the first two stencils and made up my mind that the third one would be it, no matter what. Across the whole top of the page, I printed Newsdate. It looks like Newsdate is going to be the name of the newspaper. Newsdate by Sheila the Great. That looked really neat, except it took up a lot of room. So by the time I got to my crossword puzzle on the bottom of the page, I had to make it very small. I think I spelled counselor wrong, but you can't erase when you're using a stencil, so I had to leave it that way. By the time I finished drawing little pictures of all of our activities along the side of the margins of my paper, it was time to go home. And was I glad. On Friday morning, I was ready to use the mimeograph machine. I thought I'd zip out the 75 copies I needed and still make it back to pottery. Denise would probably let me use the wheel the whole time because I haven't had a turn all week. But I discovered that you can't just zip out copies on an old mimeograph machine. For one thing, the machine uses a special kind of ink, and after half an hour my hands were full of it, but the machine didn't have enough because every page came out blank. So I poured in a ton of ink, and then when I cranked out the first few copies, big blobs of purple were all over the paper, and you couldn't read anything I'd written. That's when Mrs. Bindle said she would get the machine going for me. I told her, "What this camp needs is better office equipment." "You'll be more experienced next week, Sheila. It probably won't take so long then." I didn't want to think about next week or the week after that, or spending the rest of the summer putting out the camp newspaper. Two hours later, I was still cranking out copies. They looked better than the first batch, which I had to throw away. This time you could read practically everything, but the pictures in the margins weren't too clear. Still, if you looked hard, you could see that they were pictures. I couldn't understand why the crossword puzzle came out with such wavy lines, though. But at least I had my 75 copies of Newsdate ready. I didn't much care how they looked anymore. I was so glad to be done. I took my 75 copies, yelled goodbye to Mrs. Bindle, and ran out of the office. I personally handed a copy of my newspaper to every kid in camp. When Mouse saw it, she said, "What kind of newspaper is this?" And I said, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "I never heard of a newspaper that's handwritten. It doesn't even look like a newspaper to me." "Well, that's how much you know," I told her. "Anybody can type out a newspaper. It takes special talent and a lot more work to handwrite one." "What are those funny smudges up and down the sides of the paper?" "Funny smudges? You must need glasses. Anyone with eyes could see their pictures of our camp activities." "No kidding," Mouse said, looking closer. "All I see are ink blots." "You better have your eyes examined," I told her. "Everyone else in camp knows that they are pictures." That's when Russ came up to me and said, "Hey, Sheila, why didn't you get my mother to help you? Then you wouldn't have gotten all your papers all smudged up." Before I had a chance to say anything, two big boys walked over to us and handed me the finished crossword puzzle. "Okay, Sheila the Great," one of them said. "What's the big prize?" That's when I realized I didn't have a prize to give. I was so sure nobody would be able to figure out my puzzle. "Well," the other boy said, I had to think fast. "How would it look if Sheila the Great didn't have a super prize to give?" "Congratulations," I said. "You are both very lucky, very lucky, very, very, very lucky." "So what do we win?" they asked. "You win the camp newspaper. That's what you win. Next week you get to run it all by yourself, unless, of course, you feel you need a committee. Most people aren't able to run newspapers by themselves." Some prize. "I knew you'd think so," I told them, smiling at Mouse and Russ. That night, I made up my mind that the next time I think up such a great project, I will be the boss, and my committee of workers will do everything else. So, what did you think? Sheila the Great started treating her new friends just as badly as she treated anyone back in New York. What does this say about her character? What personality trait is she showing in this chapter? Tell me what you think tomorrow. See you.